From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building dreams with passion, pride, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tag to ownership, we're the best. Take the prize.
From the battlefield to the boardroom, this is Dog Tags to Ownership, the podcast where veterans share their journeys from serving our nation to leading in business. Hear inspiring stories of grit, growth, and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives those who serve to succeed. Tune in and take the first step toward your own mission in entrepreneurship.
Military One Percenters, welcome to Dog Tags to Ownership, where once a week we interview veterans who charted a path towards entrepreneurship. Here, our goals are to share resources, advice, and success stories about starting a business, discuss strategies for building financial independence and creating your own path, and most importantly, build a community to support each other through the challenges of transitioning from service life to civilian ownership. Today, we are extremely excited to introduce our guest to the show, Jeff McCabe. Jeff is a former Navy and Army National Guard aviator and the founder and co-CEO of R-Truth Distilling Company, Big Woods Restaurants, and Quaff On Brewing Company, all located in Indiana. Jeff, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us to discuss your incredible journey. And I guess I will be remiss that I didn't say you're also a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. So welcome to our podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Really happy to be here.
To get started, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your military service?
Sure. Well, to start with, I'm one of 6 kids, and my dad was a traveling salesman. So we were all born in different states. You can imagine I had a great childhood. I've heard people say that kids don't like to move, but we loved it. Every time Dad packed up the station wagon and told us we were going to a new territory. So I always had that kind of itchy foot ready to go somewhere, and that kind of fits in with the military a lot, I think. I knew in high school that I wanted to go to a service academy. I knew it was Annapolis because I had heard that and seen that naval aviators were the top of the heap, right? Anybody who can land on an aircraft carrier has something up on somebody who lands on a regular runway. So anyway, I was actually 17 when I went to Annapolis. That was great, very difficult. The first thing I learned at Annapolis, and it was repeated over and over again, was how to fail, because part of what they teach you there is you can't possibly do everything they're going to throw at you, and you need to live with that and figure out how to prioritize and that kind of stuff. But once you learn that, then life gets easier because you don't carry as much baggage. So tough experience, great experience, and I went just like I thought I would do when I was a kid. I went to flight school right after that. Had a great time. Didn't think I'd be flying helicopters, but it worked out that way. Turned out I was a better helicopter pilot than fixed wing pilot. I cruised on the Saratoga and the Forstall and the Independence, and had a great time doing that. The story I'll tell you really quick, if it's all right. Give you an idea how old I am. My plebe summer was the summer that Nixon resigned. And I can remember they called us all out to the Red Beach. If you've been to Annapolis, there's that red tile outside of Bancroft Hall. We're all standing at attention, actually with our chins locked. And they rolled out these TVs, big old tube TVs. And while we stood at attention, braced up, we listened to Nixon's resignation speech. Never forget how, it was just troubling time back then, but we all got past that pretty quickly. And, my experience in the fleet was great, mostly in the Middle East or Mediterranean and that kind of stuff. But once I had a chance when I decided to leave active duty, one of the things that helped me in the transition was flying in the National Guard, right? I mean, it's hard to go from being the guy who gets to walk up in a flight suit with helmet bag and hop in the machine and go flying, to being the guy who just got assigned a cubicle, being able to go out evenings and weekends and fly an Army helicopter and scare yourself a little bit really helped me with that transition. Since then, I've always looked for opportunities for myself that I felt like were more exciting than that cubicle, right? And I've always been willing to take some risk, calculated risk, intentional kind of risk. So in my civilian career, early on after getting out of the Navy, I worked for Allison Gas Turbine. They were developing the engine for the Osprey back then and that kind of stuff. And I did work in Asia doing offset programs, military parts and that kind of stuff. And that was kind of a solo, very entrepreneurial kind of experience, even though I was with, very big corporation, right? And I looked for that again, did that again, went to work for a French company that was building the engine for a Coast Guard helicopter of ours, and went to France. And, I just had a great time doing things that allowed me to, feel like I was doing something that was important to me, but also, a bit of excitement to it and a bit of personal risk when you're out there, and, the outcome's really largely dependent on your own effort, right? And it was in China that I met the guy who asked me to go work at American Express, and he had never worked at American Express. He had never been in the credit card business, and he called me up, a guy named John Yates, and he said, we actually met bowling in Beijing, if you could believe that. He was with General Electric back then, and he said, hey, I'm going to go start a new business for American Express. You want to try it? I did that as, I did that as a consultant, and, that led to all kinds of great things. I've always been open to opportunity, and when I got a chance to which was after 9/11. I was working for American Express. It took us about a year to get out of the city and get set up in New Jersey. Once we got that done, I thought, well, I've done enough with American Express. And that's when I really started to do things independently, the backing of a big corporation, and, had some great experience, worked in Romania, did some software development there, or had a stake in a software development company in Romania, and, just lots of interesting things. It was around 2008 that my partner Ed Ryan and I just started to do hometown entrepreneurship, and a lot of it was because we couldn't get a good craft beer in this little town that we live in Indiana, and we had never been in the restaurant business. We had never been in the beer business. I had started making beer when I was a kid with my dad. We'd never tried any of that stuff. So the first thing we did was open a brew pub, and we can talk about it more as you ask questions, but it just took off from the beginning. We ran out of beer the first 3 days, and
Wow.
But one of the principles for us back then was if we please ourselves, we might please other people, right? And we still say that every day. All the businesses we're in, because really we're in the experience business, and we're having a lot of fun with that.
So I know you talked about your childhood a little bit and your dad being a salesman, and you guys moving all over the place. Do you think that had anything to do with you and what you're doing now, and being in the restaurant business, the distilling business, the brewery business, did any of that have to do with how you're running your company now?
Oh, sure. My experience growing up, in an Irish family with a couple of my uncles owned taverns, and all of us, I grew up in a family that liked to have a great time, and my uncles were entrepreneurs, and so sure, that had a big influence on me.
Yeah, and then I know you mentioned too before we hit record that you were a English major at the Naval Academy, and only 4 of you from your class, and then they had you write an essay, I guess, to help solicit to help the football stadium there. And,
Yeah,
and I just think about that and what you're doing now, right? And when it comes to marketing and advertising and things, all of those things kind of come together in one spot from your experience at the Naval Academy, your experience as an aviator, getting out to how you're running that business today.
absolutely. You don't realize it at the time, right? For example, when I was going to school at Annapolis, I didn't think about how that was going to shape the rest of my life or the way I thought about things. But all those experience, and same with your childhood, making beer with my dad in the garage, right? And sitting at the end of my uncle's bar and thinking the best thing in the world was to be drinking that Batman. That was the drink they made for young men back then before they could drink alcohol, right? Thinking this is the coolest thing in the world. And, the day I got to play pool at the Elks Club with the older guys, it was great, right? So all the different experience, and, all the things you learn when you're a young division officer in the Navy and that kind of thing. And, the different kinds of pressure that you feel, all of those kind of shape who you become or who you are.
Jeff, how'd you end up back in Indiana? Did you live there at one point as you were moving around with your?
So my family did a short stint in Indiana at the time that I was in high school. I met my wife, who is still my wife, right? I think we're on year 48, right? Because I would have married her when we graduated from high school, but of course at Annapolis we weren't allowed to be married, so I had to wait 4 years. Anyway, she's from Indiana. Her family founded the town that I went to high school in, Carmel, Indiana. And so she had real roots and ties here with her family. We had always thought we'd have like a vacation home or something down in Brown County, Indiana, which is, if you haven't been here or haven't heard of it, it's like, they call it the artist colony of the Midwest. There is no industry here except for tourism and one distillery and one brewery, right? So that's how I got back here. So after 9/11, we moved back here.
Okay, you guys have a bit of a monopoly on the on that in your city there.
Yeah, well, actually, it's a town, not a city. We're not big enough to have a mayor. So imagine a town with 900 permanent residents that has thousands of people here on a weekend, right?
That's awesome.
We had 4,000 people here at the distillery on Saturday. It's nuts. It's great.
So I guess then, like, what led you to get into what you're doing now with the restaurant business? I know you briefly talked about it, making the beer and wanting that, but like, was that just you guys were like, man, we need something here?
Yeah, we were looking. I think so. Ed Ryan is one of my partners. He, like me, he had left New York. He's originally from Indiana. He had left New York where he worked for International Paper, and he came back here. He's a little bit younger than me, so he wanted his kids to start school here. And I mean, we were all looking for something. I think my son-in-law Tim was our original brewer. He runs the beer business, and he's active in the distillery. So all of us were kind of looking for something we could really build from scratch and feel good about. And we also thought we could do something unique that could really help the community, right? In a town like ours that is so dependent on tourism, you can't be static. You have to grow and offer different things and build on what you have. We thought it was a great opportunity. We didn't know, we always thought we could do well, but we didn't know we would do as well as we are now.
Yeah, and you said the demand signal for you all was you couldn't find a good craft beer. So how long did it take from that conversation to when you opened the doors and sold out in the first, 3 days?
I'd say the first conversation was, when Ed came back to Indiana, he opened up a brokerage, right? He was a financial advisor. And when I left American Express, I needed to invest some money. So I met Ed. I mean, there was nobody else with an office in this little town, right? We would meet after the market closed at 4:00, and he always had Budweiser in the refrigerator. And I'm like, Ed, I can't do this. I can't come meet you and talk about the market if we're going to drink Budweiser. So I brought some Bell's Two Hearted one afternoon. And that got Ed on board with the idea of a craft brewery and that craft beer might be a lot more fun than Budweiser. And nothing against Budweiser. And they've got the number one beer right now in the country, Michelob Ultra. How about that? Who would have ever thought of that? But anyway, it really didn't take too long. We had that conversation probably in 2006 and 2007. We bought some real estate in town. 2008, we bought the little place that we turned into the brew pub. And 2009, we opened on Veterans Day.
And then what came next? The distillery and then restaurant, or restaurant, then distillery, or how did that go?
It's like necessity is the mother of invention, right? So it's success, with success, you have to reinvest and do more, right? So we had 36 seats total, I think, at the original brew pub. And we didn't have enough places for people to sit or stand. And a very nice elderly woman across from us owned, she had kind of an indoor mall, right? If you can imagine it, with different craft shops and that kind of stuff. And she said, Jeff, I'm getting old and you need the space. Do you want to buy my building? And it was just at the right time. And that's when we built Big Woods Pizza. But we also did one of our brewery expansions into the upstairs of that building, and we brewed there for some time. And that worked for a little while. But, 4-barrel batches, you've got to brew a lot to be, to do any kind of production. And it was after that we bought the old bowling alley in town, which was owned by the Historical Society. And that was after the guys on the board for the Historical Society said, hey, we want to build a new Historical Society building downtown. Will you buy the bowling alley? And, you look at it, you go, man, that would make a cool brewery, right? And so we did that. And the brewery is still in the old bowling alley. But in the meantime, you've got to be open to opportunity, right? And a lot of stuff, if you're open, and I mean, I know, it's always good to talk about advice a little bit. I think one of the differences with entrepreneurs is that they're open to opportunity, right? And when you become, when you kind of relax a little bit and become open to opportunity, things do come to you, right? Striving sometimes when you try too hard, it's just too hard, right? So one of the other opportunities that came to us, for example, I met a guy at a beer tasting that we did downtown, or actually in Speedway, Indiana, near the track. And I had a great conversation with this young guy, and he called, that was on a Friday. On Monday, he called me and he said, we're redeveloping Speedway, Indiana, and we've got a lot on the corner of 10th and Main Street, which is right down from the Indianapolis 500. He said, we'd like you to build a restaurant there, right? And we'll help pay for it. And that turned into Big Woods Speedway, which is one of our, kind of flagship places. If you've ever been to the Indy 500, you've probably been to it. So that's kind of how it developed. And the other restaurants just kind of fell into place. But one of the things that folks are thinking about, in terms of entrepreneurship, our restaurants are our best customers, right? They sell our beer and our spirits. And everything we've done from a business standpoint is you get leverage where you can take it, right? And if I can sell direct to myself, or I can, create my best customers, I've got a business with less risk, right? I don't have to worry that the flavor of the month is going to bump me from the taps in my places.
You're vertically integrated, right? Like everything's staying in-house essentially.
Yeah. The challenge with that is you need to have really good beer if you do that, or you need to have really good spirits. When the opportunity, we couldn't own a distillery until the legislature in Indiana passed a law that said we could own both, because before that in Indiana, you couldn't be a beer guy and a spirits guy, right? And when they passed that law in 2015, we started, it's like deja vu, right? We put a pilot system up over the pizza place and started making spirits. And while we did that, we acquired this 325 acres we're on at Hard Truth, and had started to dream about what that would look like. 2017, we bought the property in 2016 and started building in 2017.
And I guess, what drew you to the spirit market? What was the first thing that you guys started distilling when you decided you're going to get into the spirit market?
Well, it's really opportunity based, right? The craft beer industry, the wave was kind of, we were kind of long in that wave. Craft beer, had kind of peaked, and we believe that craft or artisan spirits were at the beginning of that, right? And that there would be this long run where craft spirits would just keep getting building, and so we thought we saw opportunity, and we like to drink too.
Yeah, I know on your website you guys have a whiskey and a rye. Do you also do vodka or gin or anything like that, or is it just mostly brown liquor?
Well, we've got 14,432 barrels in the rack houses right now. So we've got plenty of whiskey, but we used the spirits, the clear spirits, for cash flow in the early years. So Brian Smith's our master distiller, and he would, on a pilot system, for example, he made vodka, and we decided it would be a wheat vodka, and we'd send it to the restaurants and test it at our bars, right? And that's where cinnamon vodka came from, which, believe it or not, our cinnamon vodka is the number one selling cinnamon vodka on the planet. And that sounds cool, but it's actually a very small category, right? Everybody else makes cinnamon whiskey, right? But in our toast coconut rum, if you go on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, you'll get a chance to have our toasted coconut rum. So we've got those. Our big investment is in whiskey, though, and our rye and our bourbon are, you know, we win a lot of medals, and we're a little bit, and I think a lot of that is because we're a little bit different in that we're not a sour mash distiller, we're a sweet mash distiller. And all that means is we start fresh with every batch. We don't use any setback. And I think our whiskey is just a little bit different, so that when we're in a blind competition with some of the best whiskeys in the world, we win more than our fair share, just because I think say it's 5 whiskeys. They're all 5 of us are great, right? The other guys are great. We're great, but we're just a little bit different. And that little bit of difference makes all the difference sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting that that's how you guys do your distilling. And I are both bourbon drinkers, been on the bourbon trail a few times in Kentucky. And that was going to be my question is like, when you guys got started, by the way you guys do your distilling, it doesn't seem like you have to have that mash bill to begin with to start your distilling. You guys just do it all at the start of each batch?
Yeah, we're grain to glass, right? We actually have farmers who grow the corn, the wheat, and the rye for us here in Indiana. So we start from scratch. Like you said, we start each batch fresh. Part of that was for, the decision to do that, you might say, is fortuitous in that we already had a relationship with Wilderness Trail in Kentucky, in Danville, Kentucky, because they had a yeast business. And we used them as our yeast supplier for our beer business. And we met those guys. We like to make friends. We like to work with people and this is another thing. If I was going to give anybody some advice, I'd say work with people you like, right? Don't work with people you don't, no matter how good they are, right? And we love those guys, Pat and Shane at Wilderness Trail. They were making some great whiskey, and their sweet mash, they're one of the other 3 real sweet mash distillers in the country, right? 99% of all the bourbon and rye is sour mash.
I'm curious, Jeff, because you kind of brought it up as far as working with people that you like. You have other business partners, co-owners, or how do you keep those relationships healthy, I guess? And it sounds like you've been very successful. So I'm sure it's a little bit easier when you're successful than when you hit a lot of bumps in the road. But can you share maybe some advice on that?
Well, first of all, if your business partners are like, it's like a marriage, right? I mean, you've got to do some of the same things you do to save your marriage that you do a business partnership, right? Especially when you're all taking risk and you have ups and downs. I mean, when we started, it was 2008, which is when the market crashed, right? We got through COVID together, right? And that was pretty scary because the distillery experience location was fairly new, right? And we had to figure out how to navigate that, and that's a whole other podcast probably about how to live through that. But we try really hard to respect each other's talents and opinions, and we had a conversation today about, because we're going through a period of growth where we have to do things to get to scale, and we have to, as partners, we have to relinquish some of our control to the folks who are going to help us take things to scale. The folks who've worked for us for a while now that have to make decisions without us looking over their shoulders. Really do have to kind of respect each other's talents and be as candid and honest with each other when things aren't quite right or are terribly wrong, and work through them, right?
Is it still as enjoyable as it was, when it was a very simple idea of we just want to drink good beer, to now where you're scaling and perhaps there's other motivation behind the scenes? How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm 68 years old. I can't imagine retiring, right? I'm having way too much fun for that, but I think it'd be really scary not to have something like this to come to every day. I really do enjoy it. In terms of the fun, now like Saturday when we had our harvest festival, when we had all those people here, it's 4,000 people sounds like a lot, but if you spread them over 300 acres, it's not so bad, right? But just to be able to talk to people who've been on this ride with us, sharing the experience, for 15, 16 years absolutely wonderful. When a guy brings his son over and says, okay, Jeff, he's 21 today, right? Let's have a beer together or whatever. It's just a great thing, right? And when I see somebody with a hat on and then they tell me, well, you gave me that hat and in 2010 when you told me I was having a bad hair day, it's just a blessing. So
Oh, it's awesome.
it's still fun, but you've got to want to do it, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to have to make myself do this.
And Jeff, you talked a little bit about that one of your toasted coconut rum is on the Royal Caribbean ship. How have you guys been able to scale or expand like that much to get onto cruise ships and marketing like coming from, you said it's a small town in Indiana, like how have you guys been able to expand it and get out that much reach out?
Well, if you have to be intentional about what you do. You're not going to get on Royal Caribbean unless you decide that's what you're going to do. And if you've got a rum brand and you want to introduce it to a lot of people from a lot of different places where they'll be open to suggestion, where the willing suspension of disbelief, I think that's what they say in the theater, right? You've got to be there. So we're pretty good at figuring things out, doing the research and, networking. It's all, so much of everything you do is relationships, right? So you start to talk about it. One person you talk to says, well, I know somebody who did that, or I know you're going to need a broker or a chandler, and you're going to need to meet the right person. And, you've got to work it that way. It's never been a barrier for us to do something for the first time, right? It's more fun to do something for the first time anyway. So once you get used to not knowing it for sure what you're doing, right? And you're willing to live with that ambiguity and take a little risk, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm also,
I just
Jeff,
find that amazing.
yeah, I'm also thinking about too, because you talk about how you're also getting a lot of your local supplies or from farmers locally. What kind of an impact have you had on the economy there with your businesses, I guess, I got to think there's a bit of a ripple effect that's happening just with the impact that you all have made.
Yeah, I remember it was a few years ago, in a lot of small towns, the number one employer is the school system, right? And I remember when Laura Hammock, the superintendent of schools for Brown County, called up and said, "This is a great day for me, Jeff." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, you're the biggest employer now." That weight is off my back. Seriously, we have had an impact, and I'm a humble guy, but I don't mind saying it because it's a great thing for folks to understand, particularly if they're, thinking about what they want to do. Right? I'm very happy that because we made the investment here and we did it in a way that's consistent with what this community is about. Like I said, it's all about tourism here. Little town, there are 202 shops, right? And none of them are chain stores. They're all artists or, craftsmen or, people who, want to be here in a town like this, right? And we draw from St. Louis, some from St. Louis, but Louisville, especially Cincinnati, Chicago. And that's one of the other stories is we attracted a lot of people from Chicago here during COVID, just because we had about 200 picnic tables out where people could spread out and feel like they were safe, right? But yeah, it's since we invested and we've been successful, there was a public-private partnership. You try to say that. And the Brown County Music Center got built, right? And it's a great music center, and they get a lot of great touring acts, and that brings more people in, right? And there are other businesses. We've got great set of zip lines, right? We're now the number 3 rated mountain bike trails in the United States at Brown County State Park, which is across the street from us. So we have more and more to offer, and now we draw people who can work and want to work in Brown County are pretty much employed, and we draw from the surrounding counties now too.
Yeah, that's amazing, Jeff, and just what you're doing for the community. We've had a few people come on and talk about when you get out of the military, going back to your hometown or back to a community where you have roots, and how do you set up a business there to really help that community? And you're just, a perfect example of that. So we really appreciate you sharing that.
Well,
And I guess,
I think it's a lot more fun, right?
yeah. So I guess with that though, like where do you see your businesses going in the next 5 to 10 years? Because just talking with you right now, seems like you guys are, been expanding, doing all these things are out, outside of Indiana. I think you're selling in 30 different states at this point, but where do you see your businesses going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, our primary focus is on hard truth. The beer business is a great business. We're going to keep it for right now. We're happy with the size it is, and we're happy that we've got the number one selling porter and the number one selling blonde beer in the state. And we're happy that everybody in Indiana gets to enjoy our beer, and we've got people making that trip from surrounding states to get some of our beer. Right? Restaurants. I know you guys. I think we were going to talk a little bit about restaurants. That's a tough business, right? We're happy with what we've got there too. And not that we wouldn't consider doing more with restaurants, but we'll see what comes to us there. We really like what we did in Speedway. We think it's a model for other venues like that. But Hard Truth has such tremendous potential that a lot of our effort is going into it. And, we think really that all these businesses, we're in the experience business. Here on this 325-acre campus, so much for us to work with, right? We do ATV tours, right? Where you drink and we drive, right? And we've got the only tiki boat cruise that I'm aware of on a lake in the middle of Indiana, right? Where you go out and drink toasted coconut rum on a pontoon boat, listen to Jimmy Buffett and Gilligan is your captain, right? Things like that. I mean, we're serious about the whiskey, but we have fun too, right? Recently the Robb Report said that our first bourbon release ranks in the top 50 bourbons of the century. And I'll take that, right? And we'll run with that. So we are in 30 states. What we're focused on, not so much is more states right now, but getting as deep as we need to get in those states to be really relevant.
And you had mentioned with the restaurant business and how it's a difficult business. And you guys have a few of the big woods restaurants in the
Right.
Indiana area.
Right.
And looking at that model, are you thinking about potentially like making it into a franchise that people could franchise other places, or is that a thought that you guys have had?
Well, we could do a franchise or a license, and we'd be open to talking about it. Like I said, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. You've got to be open to opportunity, right? We think we do some things right. Part of the reason I said the restaurant business is tough is because the margins fluctuate, and you've really got to be good with people, because not just the customers, but you've really got to dial into the culture that makes those people that have to work so hard in those restaurants feel good about what they're doing. And I think we're pretty good at that. But if you've got 500 or 600 people working in restaurants, it's a big deal to keep that all headed in the right direction all the time. It's a great challenge. And we're at the point now where our culture is pretty stable, and we've got people who've kind of grown up in it, who can really help us scale that.
Jeff, what is a typical day like for you, and what are your responsibilities now, I guess, as an owner?
Well, sometimes I do things like this, and I wouldn't say there's a typical day, because I'll go out on the road sometimes, and sometimes I just go out and work with the rest of the team and the distributors. And especially if we're opening up a new market, of course we've got regular executive responsibilities and that kind of thing. If I'm here in Brown County, I love to be here, especially on the weekends. I like to spend the weekend on the property, meet people, and let them tell me their stories. I don't have to tell so many stories anymore, because people come to me and say, hey, let me tell you about this, or let me tell you about that, or do you remember? And I used to drink a lot back in the day, and I don't remember, but I love to hear the story anyway. But, that's... I think being authentic, and not just me, but my partners being here and, really connecting with people is part of the experience, right? So I like to do that. I also remember what George Washington said: you have to be there to have a good opinion, right? He actually said that when somebody asked him why he was spending the winter in Valley Forge. Because what the rest of the officers would do is they'd go home for the winter, right? To go back to wherever they were from, and let the troops suffer in the cold. And George was different, right?
Yeah.
So
that's incredible.
Not a typical day, but we're actually implementing a system now that's an entrepreneur system called EOS. and you probably heard of it. So this is part of how we go to scale. I'm jealous because I kind of have to watch that happen, which is a good experience for me. It's fun. What's fun right now is that things are changing, right? I'm not good at status quo kind of stuff.
How many total employees do you have, I guess, between the different businesses now?
About 700.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So about the whole small town works for you.
Well, they're spread out. I mean, we've got,
Yeah.
Indianapolis and other places, but restaurants, if you've got a 300-seat restaurant, and we've got a few of those, that takes a lot of people. All right. The distillery we can run with, relatively small number of people, but then you've got sales people, we've got salespeople out there on the market too, especially for Hard Truth.
With the distillery, so it's a 350-acre compound-ish. So do you have the distillery there, but you also sell beer and also restaurant, like have your main staples from your restaurant? Is that all encompassing in that one location?
Yeah, we've got a hospitality business here, really. We have a 300-seat restaurant. We will take big corporate groups in here if they, want to have a meeting here and then have some fun in the afternoon. Like I said, we have the tour center with the tours. So you can do everything from a fun tour like, get lost on an ATV with one of our tour guides, or you can do a regular distillery tour like you do in Kentucky. And we can go deep. We'll do in the barrel, right? Which is a different kind of tour for people who really are serious about whiskey and, the whole experience, the thieving experience, all that. We kind of feel like you need to have enough different kinds of things for folks to do that they've got more reasons to come back. And we recognize too that a lot of times the whiskey aficionado comes and brings his wife or friend who are not so interested in that. So why not give them a toasted coconut rum drink, right? And why not tell that story too?
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions. I don't know if Matt does, but I guess before we close up and get to our final two questions, is there anything that we didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about today?
Well, would you like to know what Byron Nelson taught me?
Yes.
So in 1997, when I was working for American Express, I hosted a golf school for American Express. And back then, I think Byron was like 86 years old. One of the greatest golfers of all time, if not the greatest, right? And we hosted a golf school together. And, we'd bring in and Express customers for that. Just 8 people would get to go to this golf experience, and each one would have their own pro to golf with for 3 days. So anyway, after the second year of doing golf school, Byron sat me down and he said, Jeff, next year, why don't you give up your seat and bring one more of your customers in? And I said, why do you say that, Byron? And he said, well, you're not going to get any better. I really didn't enjoy golf like real golfers do, right? He said, you're not going to get any better. And then he said, and we were sitting by the putting green, and the 7 pros we had there were all out on the putting green, getting in a little practice before the day started. And he said, watch these guys. And I'm watching them, right? He said, okay, what do you see? And I said, well, I made up some silly answer. And he said, no, that's not it. And I tried another one, and he said, okay, look. He said, watch this guy putts from about 25 feet, and the ball goes right past the ball. And then he said, watch this guy. Another miss, right? And he says, what did you notice? And I said, well, they both putted long. All right. And he said, that's right. If you ever learn anything from me, applies to everything you do. He said, never putt short. He said, if you putt short, you never had a chance. Right. And I've never forgotten that lesson. I've told people that story a bunch of times, but if I'm ever giving advice to anybody, especially somebody who's interested in being an entrepreneur, I tell them, once you make the commitment and you're willing to take the risk, don't putt short. Right.
That's great.
If you're going to miss, it's long.
I was thinking that's where Hard Truth came from, as far as him telling you you're not going to get any better.
Exactly. Yeah. I should write a book of hard truths, shouldn't I?
Yeah. So I think we're getting into our final 2 questions.
Okay.
So my question is, I'm into real estate. That's my passion. I listen to a lot of podcasts, read books associated with real estate. Is there anything you'd recommend, to our listeners, maybe a veteran that's transitioning out or someone that's interested in entrepreneurship, a book or 2, something that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple of things. One book that it's a book, and I'm sure you can get it on Audible or something like that. But we're I don't know. Can you see behind me? It says, "Always take the high road. It's far less crowded."
Yes.
Charlie Munger said that. He was Warren Buffett's partner until he passed away a year and a half ago or so. And he wrote a book called Poor Charlie's Almanac. That's a book that we actually give to people when they come in at the management level. It's a lot of truths about, not just about business, very simple things about life that people skip. And it's one of those things you can keep coming back to it, and you always read, see something new. But just a ton of things you can learn, especially for an entrepreneur who's necessarily going to take risk, right? How he and Warren looked at those things for years and years and years, and were very successful. So that's one thing. I like a lot of Malcolm Gladwell stuff. I'm into the Revenge of the Tipping Point right now, right? And my son, who's in the business with us, is like a podcast geek, right? And so he's always throwing stuff at me. But I think there's so much out there. One thing I'm listening to right now is X is easier than 2X. And that, just think about that line, right? The book kind of explains that. But that's what's in my that's what's in my car right now.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, those are great recommendations. All right, so Jeff, our last question, I guess going back to your Navy roots, Admiral William McCabe authored the book, Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World. So do you still make your bed every morning?
I make my bed every morning. I get tears in my eyes when I think about how well I had to make that bed at Annapolis, right? That was like a thing. We had a guy there at Annapolis who had built a contraption so that you could reach under the bed and the rack and tighten it to get your rack super tight, right? Yeah, I make my bed.
Did you instill that lesson onto your kids as well as they were growing up?
Not successfully. I don't know that any of them do. I've never, with my kids, I kind of let them, I've always tried to be helpful and tried to set kind of an example, but I've always let them, kind of be who they were going to be, right? A lot of the art that you see, the original art for Big Woods and Hard Truths, my daughter did. She's an artist and and a writer. And my second daughter is a lawyer out in Grand Junction, in Grand Junction. My son Ian is here with me.
Yes, it was like a family business, basically.
It's pretty neat.
Military One Percenters, whether you're brainstorming your first business idea, already running a company, or just curious about where to start, Dog Tags to Ownership is the place for you. Please hit that subscribe button to receive all new episodes. Also, if you know someone who has turned their dog tags into ownership, drop us a DM on social media or tag someone. We are always looking for new guests to bring onto the podcast. And as always, Military One Percenters, thank you for your service. Let's continue this journey, working together to write our next chapter. Until next week, keep pushing to turn those dog tags into ownership.
From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building dreams with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tags to ownership, we're the best.